Hello and welcome to another episode of Talk'n TRM, the podcast dedicated to travel risk management. My name is Travel Risk Bex, and today I'm here with a new friend, is how I'm going to describe you, Laurie. Everyone's a friend, but you're a slightly newer one than some of the other people I've had on the show so far. But that doesn't mean you're any less. It's just we've only just really had the chance to start doing bits and pieces together. So I met a few probably towards the middle of last year or the year before, or the beginning of last year, in some of the work that you were doing with a particular company in the travel risk management area, a sort of consultancy project. And we kind of like a meeting of minds on certain things when it came to technology. And we had some great conversations around, some of your experiences and the way that's kind of shaped the way you just think about technology generally. And I thought, I think I want to get him on the show. So welcome. And without further ado, Laurie, if you could introduce to our guests, who are you and what is it that you do?
Hi. Well, yes. Thanks, Bex, and thanks for inviting me on. I'm Laurie Young, and I describe myself as working at the intersection of technology and business. So I've got a deep background in technology. I did a PhD in computer science and then worked in software development agencies for over a decade, working for probably hundreds of companies through agency-based projects. And through that time, I transitioned from working directly on projects to managing multiple projects to overseeing many projects, and then eventually overseeing the whole of the London office for an international company. So I was responsible for the business side of things, working with some amazing programmers, and I had a background in programming. So I got this really nice combination of how technology and business interact. And what I really focus on is trying to make that as stress-free as possible, because for many people these days, particularly on the business side, they don't have a strong business, so they don't have a strong technology background, they don't fully understand it, and they find it a bit stressful. So I like to come in and make that as easy as possible for them. And that's what brought me into the TRM space. Slightly different context in that I was working more with a technology company that needed some of my business knowledge, but I came in and I was just helping them fix a few issues and solve a few projects on a consultancy basis, which I engaged for a while, did that, and left. But it was during that time that I met you.
It was. And we were talking about the technology piece that you were working with, which, for our listeners to say, it's a technology piece that sits within the sort of tracking piece, but it's got a lot more to do with that. In fact, we've had John on the show, so we can talk about it. It's fine. But there's we were talking specifically about SMEs at that point, weren't we? And trying to, because they had sort of two products, but this isn't a show to talk about the product, but we're just sort of set where we were. Because they were able to kind of look after the larger corporates, but we were also really interested in this SME space. And I think that's what kind of spurred some of the conversations and some of the common threads that we found, is that, as you just rightly nailed it with the technology piece, if you're running a business, your main key skill set is whatever it is that you're running the business about, right? So for me, a consultancy in travel risk management, that's my thing. I don't know about computers, and I can't tell you how much I miss having IT support. Now I don't work for an organization because I'm kind of just learning as you go, and it's frustrating and stressful. And I guess a little bit like travel management, it does feel like IT and security management is this kind of dark art as well. And if you're not trained in it, you can easily make mistakes, or you can, I think, have the wool pulled over your eyes. So I think there's so many synergies. And obviously there's two different standards talking about this stuff. You've got the risk management piece, you've got 27001. Like, these are big things that as companies we're trying to, or as owners of companies, we're trying to get control of. And it's all connected, right? So it makes perfect sense. And so
that's definitely exactly right. I mean, what I've seen as the parallel that really stood out to me was this idea that, particularly if you're a CEO of a company, you've got the thing that you are an expert in, which is whatever your background is, and then suddenly you've got all of these other things that you now have to at least be competent in. Yes. Like, I come from the world of helping people with the technology part of that, but that's not the only part of it. There is the travel risk management part of it. And it's all a matter of saying, right, what's the amount that they need to know in order to do their job competently, and what do they need to learn and what do they not need to learn, and helping them manage that and be comfortable with what they've learned, but also know that they're not learning the correct things. If that makes sense. Like they're not getting too lost in the unnecessary details, but not skipping important details.
It's almost being able to highlight the stuff that's really important and making sure that stuff's covered, isn't it? Whilst knowing, agree completely. And I think these things can seem so big, which is why obviously consultants and stuff can help, because we can go through the weeds, we can do that bit, we can do the dirty bit, and then just get you to the kind of endpoint as to where you need to be. So I'm really curious, Laurie, obviously coming into this space from the background that you have, what I always ask technology people this, what on earth did you think when you got to travel? Because obviously it's quite different, isn't it? And I don't mean traveling as in when you started seeing some of the technology that we're dealing with in the travel space, and actually kind of some of the risks that people are taking, I guess, on a daily basis. What were your thoughts?
My first thoughts were, it actually took me a while to actually believe, that's a lot of actuallys, what I was being told about some of the technology. The antiquatedness, the old-fashionedness of some of the core technology. I don't know if you've come across it, but there's a documentary channel on YouTube called Wendover Productions, and they did a really interesting documentary on the GDS system, which is the underlying software that manages a lot of the travel industry. And I haven't fact-checked this, but I assume that they're accurate when they say that software, which is the backbone of the global aviation industry, was written closer in time to the Wright brothers' first flight than to today. So take that with a pinch of salt, because I haven't double-checked that for myself, but I can totally believe it, having seen how it works. And it's really fascinating.
50s, 60s, I think 70s, something like that. 50s, 60s, 70s. It's old. It's really old, and it's clunky, and it's the root of a lot of the issues that we have across the industry. Sorry, GDSs, but it's the truth.
Well, it's really fascinating from a thinking about it from a technology point of view, which is how the technologies change over time. And what the GDS does, and does very well, is it lets lots of different airlines, travel providers to all cooperate. And there are better bits of software that have been proposed and written, but because it's all about cooperation, whoever is the first person to use it gets nothing from it, because there's no one there to cooperate with. And so there's an entire kind of game theory problem about how do you get the industry to move to something when whoever's the first person to move pays most of the cost. So no one wants to be the first mover.
Of course. And I think this is so, I guess that there were some very clever commercial deals put in place to kind of ensure that the GDS became like the central piece for the travel management companies ecosystem. And there's lots of TMCs that have moved away from that now, and they see the GDS just very much as a content provider. But there are also others that are very, very sewn into that still, and they've built their entire organizations around that. And it's very difficult to become agnostic or to release yourself from that when it's powering everything that you do. And the companies are funding your organization as well, because there's definitely big commercials involved in that as well, to ensure that people are continuing to use them. And I think those companies, in the hope that the GDSs will evolve, which they are doing, but there's 3 in the world, they're massive, and it's not an easy thing to evolve, right?
Well, I mean, to be fair to the GDS companies, they are putting innovations and new things, bells, whistles, and features on top of what they have. But because it's multiple companies and they all have these kind of integration systems, then you can't really change that integration. It's actually very similar to the problem we have with email. Like, we all get phenomenal amounts of spam email. If I ever open my spam folder, it's got thousands of emails in it. We know of ways of changing it. What we don't know is how to change every email provider in the world to use the same new solution. It's that as soon as there's interoperability, the ability to change is very difficult. And obviously there's pros and cons about whether or not you want interoperability, but
this is exactly how our conversations go, but I love it. Okay, so Thank you for sharing that with us. And I didn't want to kind of, it wasn't a kind of hate on the GDSs, but there is this thing. And I think a lot of new companies, or certainly companies in the risk space, who are kind of developing technologies now, because it's an area that's growing rapidly, they don't know the travel technologies piece. It's what makes, and this is a shout
Hmm.
out to me, but it's not intentional. It's what makes what I do unique, because I get the travel space. And when when I sit there and I go, but it's not just a case of doing this. It's a little bit more complicated than that, because of course you've got all of the different suppliers doing different things, as you've just so rightly said. So yeah, thank you for articulating that. I think it's a reason that business travel hasn't evolved in the way that we would like it to have done, for sure. And there's lots of frustrations around that. But let's talk about, your why in this space. So I know it's slightly different
Hmm.
for you, and we've kind of talked around this a little bit, but what is it that's kind of ignited your passions, I think is fair to say.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that. And I'll kind of start with a perspective from inside the TRM world and then transition to one from outside looking in. Um, from the work I've done, and I've known John for many years, so I've seen him going through the process of the TRM space. It is this view that I've formed over the years, which is the space is not taking advantage of many of the innovations that have happened in technology over the last 20, 30 years. And there's definitely some innovative companies that are, but as a whole, the industry hasn't taken that step forward. And I'm a huge believer in the power of technology to really optimize and transform industries for the better, for everyone, for the end customer, for the companies, for the people working at the companies. I think I've seen it happen in other industries, and everyone is very happy with it. Though to be fair, the transition can be a bit stressful at times. And I very much see the travel risk space, and actually most of the travel space more broadly, to be something that's ready and actually really in need of that. And I think that's really fascinating. I see that in quite a lot of industries, but it's really interesting. So that's kind of inspired one form of passion. But I don't want to talk too much about that because it is quite technical and maybe not quite on what most of the audience is keen to hear about. I think the flip side of it is when I was running the London office of the company I used to work at, which was mostly American based, but an international company, and I was the managing director of the London office. We had lots of people traveling, and I never had an explicit, clear thought about travel risk. The closest that we had is we had a couple of people based in the States who were supporting people with the travel, which was mostly helping people book hotels and being able to reassure people if they'd missed a flight, yes, the company would cover the new flighters, so as long as they hadn't missed it because they were out partying for 3 days or something crazy. And then gradually over time, I saw that we just had what I would call a number of near misses, things that actually didn't cause us any problems, but easily could have.
Okay.
Just to give a couple of stories to kind of
Yeah,
illuminate that.
please.
I can think of a time where one of my colleagues was on a project based in Dusseldorf, based in Germany, and the project they were working on was getting towards the launch time, and they had to work quite late one evening. I think they finished about 11 o'clock. Hadn't had any dinner, so stopped off at a late night takeaway on the way home, and got pretty horrific food poisoning. Ended up spending a couple of days in the hospital, feeling incredibly
Goodness.
unwell,
Oh, no.
which didn't actually cause problems with the project. It was the day he had actually finished it. It was like finished the project, was going to go home, get some sleep, and then come back to the UK, and actually ended up stuck in not hospital, thankfully, but just in the hotel room for a couple of
Which
days.
which we've talked, I talk about this sort of happening, that when you're ill, there's nothing you want
Mm,
more than to be at home, is there? You do not want to be stuck in in another hotel. So just add all of that onto the fact that you're feeling horrific as well, and now it's in your private time, and all of that kind of stuff as well. Horrendous for the person.
yeah,
Obviously, it didn't affect the business. I think this is the key, though, isn't it? Right? This is I'm really keen to get into this, Laurie. The traveller experience is just something we overlook so much, whereas actually the travel risk management piece is completely dedicated to that, if that makes sense. So please go on. I'm in. Tell me
yeah.
more.
I mean, that was like maybe not the most major example, but there's certainly things that we as a company should have been doing to just have stuff in place to make it slightly more comfortable. Another example I can think of that stood out was that I was directly involved with was we were everyone in the office was traveling to the US. We had one of these things where the whole company gets together, and we had many near misses from this. Like the one that I remember was one of my colleagues was on an earlier flight and was landing in, I can't remember which city, but one of the East Coast airports, just as I was transiting in Reykjavik in Iceland. And so I was just checking my phone, and I got a message saying that she'd been pulled aside by immigration and had been taken away for enhanced questioning. I don't know exactly details, but was just taken away, and they wanted to ask her questions. She was from an Eastern European country, which may or may not have had something to do with it. And I'm thinking, like, if this is problematic, then we're certainly going to have to sort out lawyers or something. That's really, really quite stressful. And as it happened, I got this message while I was getting on my plane. So there was very limited time window in which I could have done anything. I was able to send just a quick notification to the people in the States, and actually, as it turned out, they questioned her for half an hour, 45 minutes, and then let her into the country. So it was another near miss where things could have gone badly wrong, but actually were okay. And ones that I weren't involved with, but similar, traveling to the States, we had an office in Sweden who flew over to one of our gatherings in the US, and there was major storms, and they had to divert, they had to land in another airport, and they got put on a bus, and they then had, I think it was a 12-hour coach ride to get to where they were trying to get to, which meant they arrived exhausted. They were not exactly well rested or happy, and they missed some of the important parts of the event.
Yeah, and all this money, spent on these events, and then we try and cram it all into 2 days or whatever it is. Actually, especially now, we've really got to kind of make allowances and stuff for the delays, not just from you're going to miss the content that we put in, but actually you're going to feel like crap, quite frankly. Sorry, everyone. But that's the key of it, when you are sort of hustled around and moved around like that. I also just want to go back to that other story, because I just, we said again, fortunately she got let in, it was okay. But she still had this traumatic experience of being pulled aside in front of her colleagues. Who knows what really happened in that 45-minute interrogation, but she was alone with whoever was interrogating her, the officers. It must have just been humiliating. You know what it's like if you haven't done anything wrong, but the alarm goes off and you're like, oh my god, oh my god, everyone's looking, and it's just a random check. It's awful. And then add into that, you're tired, you've just come off a flight, you may be nervous or unsure about what you're about to do. I appreciate you guys were all having a meetup, which is a positive thing, but it still brings anxiety. Like, some people don't feel comfortable doing stuff like that. It brings a lot of other stuff to them. So this travel piece that we just kind of get on and do has such a knock-on effect to how we feel, how we work, and how we're doing stuff. So I love this. Thank you for your kind of candidness about the near misses. I think we're having near misses every day. We're just not considering them like that, and we're certainly not tracking them.
Yeah,
so
and I certainly hadn't been considering them as near misses at the time. I was like starting to be aware, like, hang on, we're doing a lot of travel. I could give you a bunch of other stories that are kind of in a similar vein. And at some point I'm like, what should some of these, how should we be thinking about some of these? And just to kind of flesh it out with one more, is when we were traveling back and forth to the States, we were based in the UK and we'd go to the States, and then occasionally we'd stay there for a few extra days. And at some point someone asked the question, are we actually complying properly with the US immigration law? What are you allowed to do while you're in the States? And we did actually, in that case, we did get on the phone to a particular US immigration lawyer and say, this is what we're doing. And he said, look, most of what you're doing is fine, but this little bit here and this little bit here, you shouldn't be doing that. Like, it's small enough that if they look into it, they're going to say it's an honest mistake. But I'm telling you now, stop doing it, because it's
now
just
you've
not,
asked.
Now you've asked, it's not right. And if the authorities ever did take a dim view of something, that's something they could point at. So stop doing that.
And this is again another golden piece that we just kind of want to try and explore. The whole visa, the immigration piece. You've got travellers that have obviously been travelling for years and years and years and years. It was always a kind of paper game. It was always, long forms to fill in, having a bit of banter, sometimes with the customs officials, sometimes not. But you would know your patter. Sometimes you'd be pushing a bit of money their way, depending on the country that you're kind of going into. And there's this real kind of what I call the road warriors kind of, it's fine, you can just do it. And it's like, well, actually, you can't now, because the whole world is digitalizing, and that's the point. Countries want to digitalize. They want to know who's in their country. They want to know how long you stayed. The main reason, because they can charge you. And there's a whole billable piece around this, from the VAT and the tax piece. It's not, I'd love to say it's all about caring and knowing who's in the country. It's not. There's a whole financial piece. And John touched on this a little bit. This is one of the biggest risks to organizations right now, because, the UK coming out of Europe, that's had major ramifications for companies. I used to joke with, travelers back in the day that, well, just get a tourist visa, you'll be fine. Like, don't just get a tourist visa now if you're going in to do business. Look at it, make sure you don't need a work permit, because there's nothing worse than being turned away as you're going into a country, let alone the humiliation for the person it's happening to, but the expense and the costs and the frustration and the client at the other end and everything else. It's just this stuff feels, a higher risk than, some awful, horrific disaster happening, which will happen, unfortunately, but it's not likely to happen as much as some of this stuff. And it just kind of doesn't really get looked at that easily. And I think a lot of that is data. I think a lot of that is the problem with the travel data as it stands. I've just been looking at a corporate stuff going, why do we send this stuff to the client? Like, it's a whole TMC data for corporate. I just looked at their 6 months travel, and I'm just like, it's there anyway. So I didn't get all travel, which, always happens, guaranteed. That's what they send across. And I was just like, they don't care about all of this stuff. They don't care about. They want to know the cost of the trip. That's where we're trying to get to with the data, and actually to compare stuff. And I've got line by line by line of the ticket change and this and that. And there's just got to be an easier way of making this better for the corporates, and it comes from the data, but which I know is a bugbear of yours as well, as you started kind of going through it. So let's talk about, what are your learnings, and how is this all come together for you, I guess, to sort of look into what you're going to be doing now and your next steps?
Yeah. So I think the thing that has really stuck in my mind is just the awareness of where this should be kind of on the radar of critical things for a company. And it depends, honestly, very much on the size of the company and what they're doing. And if you've got someone who is traveling and doing, like, going on their own vacation, and they're doing a little bit of work because they're maybe such a key person that it's really hard for them to probably take 2 weeks off. That's the point where kind of we started, and we were like, we don't need to think about anything there. And obviously that's arguable, but that was our attitude at the time. But once you kind of elevate to that, where you've got the company paying for trips, that started to trigger a whole load of issues for us. And we had, again, not particular cases, but examples of someone had gone to the States as part of a work trip and decided to extend that as part of their vacation. And now you're in this gray area. And we're potentially going to have problems from that if we haven't at least given them the right advice and told them what they can and can't do. And to take those first steps is not only relatively easy, I think it's quite easy to just get some advice on what you should be telling your employees in this situation, in that situation. But it was also something that we were getting demand from the teams. They were saying, like, I'm going to the States for this meetup, and then I'm going to take 2 weeks off and drive coast to coast. Is there anything I need to be aware of? When I'm asked at the immigration point, am I here for business or pleasure? What do I say? And we was finding that we were having to start looking for these answers in order to tell them. Because if we just say, oh, I don't know, I'm going to make something up, that's really not okay. That's a professional setting. You have to give professional advice. Yeah, so I think 100%. I think that I understand why many companies don't properly dig into this because it seems like quite a big thing. But the early stages of just like, okay, I need to get some advice, I need to know roughly where I'm going, is much easier and still far too overlooked.
100%. And I think, we really got into this during the pandemic when, obviously TMCs were not able to charge because they're generally charging transaction fees and there were no travel. But the questions that were coming through from travelers, from travel managers, from, anyone involved in the client were more than we'd ever known previously. Before it was just like, get me on a flight, I don't care, I'll have a look at the confirmation when I get there, kind of thing. And then they go, oh, there's something wrong or whatever, and you realize on the day. It was much more kind of like that's just how it worked. Since travel stopped and it has continued, the questions that people are asking now are huge, and the TMC has this base of knowledge from a travel perspective. The risk and security companies have a huge amount of knowledge from that side. And to me, this kind of merger of experience and of knowledge and technologies just seems like the most next logical step. And where it's failing a little at the moment is where the TMCs are still very much, I'm just booking. I'll pretend I'm doing this other stuff, and it will look like I'm doing this other stuff, but I'm not really doing it to any depth to actually really kind of help and support. Versus the risk management companies who are so detailed and so thorough. The two things are just struggling to mesh at the moment, and the disciplines don't understand each other very much. So again, it's a kind of, it feels like there will be a coming together of these things, but I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, it's definitely like if you look at other services that businesses need, increasingly there's much more kind of easy online tools that they can use that will provide that. And that hasn't really, like, there's a few offerings, and John's company is one of them, that talks to that, but the demand is still, it's not something that many companies are going like, oh, this is a thing that we can bring in. They expect the TMCs to do it. And the TMCs are, I mean, they're struggling. They don't have enough staff, and they don't really have the capability to do it. They should do, but they don't. And that's where the challenge comes in, is particularly as you get to a larger company. I mean, my experience is all with SMEs, but you get to larger companies and all of these issues just scale up. You get all of the near misses that I was having, and some of them are not misses. Some of them actually cause a problem.
Yeah, this is it.
It's just the law of large numbers. If you have enough people traveling, someone's going to have something go wrong somewhere.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess this is why the large corporate, but when you get to that size, it's so difficult to then put something in place, or it feels so difficult to put it in place. So let's just talk about, I mean, you've offered a lot of advice throughout this, but let's just end in our final question, which is about our kind of golden nuggets. So however, whichever perspective you want to bring this in from, Laurie, but anyone, I guess, wanting to get into this space, feeling a bit challenged by it, maybe challenged by technology, what's your advice for them to start looking into this?
That's a good question. I think from the point of view of a business that's starting to either getting to the stage where it's starting to travel or growing the amount of travel it's doing, my advice would be, don't wait, because getting that early bit of getting onto the on-ramp of managing travel risk is not expensive and not difficult. And then you've got these early processes in place that can grow as you need to quite easily. And that's really important. And just, it gives so much reassurance to the staff if you just say, look, we care about this, we're paying attention to this. It makes it a better experience for you. I think that's for companies starting to travel. And I think my advice to people working in the TRM space would just be to start looking around for the ways in which technology can really has the potential to completely change the whole industry, and how I think it really is, like, it's surprising to me that it hasn't done so yet. And I can't believe for the life of me that in 50 years it won't have changed. So sometime between now and in 50 years, and probably sooner rather than later, it's going to change drastically.
I agree, and there's been so much talk about it for such a long time, from even from the IATA side of things, and where they've been trying to get to with their NDC stuff, and that's one side of it. Obviously, you've just got a phenomenal amount of industries all kind of colliding and working together to become the travel industry, right? We're not, we're all separate, really. and we're all in silos. I'm just going to ask you one last question, and then I'm going to let you go. How do you see, with all of your vision, what would you, you know,
Mhm.
how do you see the travel industry? Can I ask you that question from a technology perspective? What could it be? How could it be different?
It's got to be with the fluidity of data. Like, this is the big change that I see happening, is data collection is becoming ubiquitous in pretty much everything we do, and large data sets. So big data has been a phrase that's thrown around the technology space for, and it just means like gathering as much data as you can, and lots of data happens when you travel. I like to think in terms of events. You book a trip, you book a ticket, you cancel a ticket, you change a ticket, you get on a plane, you miss a plane. All of this, every single one of these is data, and as this is all gathered, that forms a large data set, and that is going to make information so much more available. It's going to make reporting and analyzing data much, much simpler. And as soon as you start talking about big data, someone always brings in artificial intelligence, because big data is kind of the thing you need to train all of the different AI models. And it's not like immediately obvious how AI is going to change things. There's so many different ways. I don't like making predictions, but like, everyone is scrambling to figure out how to use AI to solve problem X. And someone is going to be looking very hard at how to combine that travel data with AI to come up with innovative ways to solve problems, either to find ways of reducing travel to save climate change, or to reduce costs. I think insights like that are going to start coming quite quickly.
I absolutely love that. Look at that, everyone. Off the bat, this guy knows his stuff. I was really cruel then, Laurie, and you just nailed it. I completely agree. I think data has been one of the stumbling blocks for the travel industry for a really long time. I'm seeing some amazing companies come through now, and actually companies that are, just there to clean the data and then do stuff with it. That's how bad it was. We needed to create companies to clean the data, to sort it all out and to move things on. AI is being spoken about a lot. I'm with you. I'm not quite sure how it's going to transform yet, but it is. They're already doing stuff with it in so many different systems. It's just how that will make the traveler experience better, and obviously from a security perspective, how we can make that better again. But again, it's got to be used in one way or another, because the volume of data that we're creating. I love this idea of these data points that we create when we travel. A lovely guy called Alan has done a stuff with us, and he describes, when you come into a hotel, you're like a ship, and there's water coming in before you've even come, and that's your data before you've even arrived. Then you've got the data points as you actually arrive, and then there's a huge, is it wake after a ship? I can't get my words right, but as you leave,
Yeah.
and it's still there, and it's the same in every single movement you make: the accommodation, the flight, the train, the taxi, the everything. Once we get a handle on this, and a wise man also said to me once the travel industry gets a handle on the power of the data it has, it will be much like the auditors, the PwCs, the EYs of this world, that realized the power they had of analyzing the audit data and the insights that can give corporates, rather than this kind of spitting out that we do at the moment, which is this sort of, you did this, you did that. It's not very analytical, but it's coming. I agree. Okay, Laurie, is there anything else you would like to add?
Just a quick little riff on that last point you made. I've also done some work with a hotels project, where we're looking at ways of making hotels more discoverable for people who have specific and special needs, whether or not that's disabilities or particular desires about sustainability in the hotels or whatever. And that's a similar thing. It's a big data play, trying to figure out information about what the hotels actually have. And one of the challenges that I've seen in that industry, which is like, hotel is very closely related to travel, possibly the same sector, is the same thing. It's a low level of understanding of how to work with data, how to interact with data, how to send information from one system to another. It's just something that in a lot of the other industries I've seen, and particularly working in the technology sector, has become almost like standard practice. And it's something that in the whole of the travel sector, I just haven't seen people really grasping, there is this amount of data and we can use it to really optimize the traveler experience, which is going to make happy travelers, which is going to increase the amount of hopefully green travel, because we can also use it to make travel greener.
Yeah, 100%, and reduction, and giving them this holistic view, this visibility of their entire program. I think that's when there are some great companies that are doing it, and they're well on their way. You've got the unlock datas, PredictX have been kind of moving into this space for a while now, but it's then being able to analyze it as well. You need
Hmm.
to be able to have it. There's this kind of combination, and again, the TMCs are just ripe for this. Like, it, go and have, go, you can read the data and go back to the corporate and actually make it make sense. I think when it comes to the planet, which everyone knows is a huge driver of mine and everything that I do, we've got to realize that the data holds the power in how to show people how to reduce travel. And I
Yeah,
think that's what scares the travel industry, because the travel industry doesn't really want to reduce, because that's how we make money. And until we work out how we move this, which again comes from data, we're going to be stuck in this kind of difficult
I
situation.
think
So
there's I think there's these two barriers. One is the fear that we're going to reduce travel, and like I don't see the way that the human race operates changing to not travel. It's just so deeply ingrained within us. Like that would be good for the planet, but I don't see it happening. So I think we're just going to have to switch to more sustainable forms of travel. And then the second barrier is just a general uncertainty about how to interact with technology. Who do you need to hire? How do you need to work with people? And I see that being a real problem.
Laurie, thank you so much for your insight today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I knew we'd have things to talk about, and I hope it's been really interesting and insightful for our listeners, because I wanted to bring you into this because of your kind of unique perspective, not just from the technology side and the knowledge that that technology can help to solve this stuff, but also your lived experience of running a business, and actually what we call your near misses, which could have been so different, that every single business is dealing with on a daily basis today. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
I look forward to catching up with you soon at some point in the not so distant future. To our listeners, you have been listening to an episode of Talking TRM. We've been joined today by Laurie Young. My name is Travel Risk Bex. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, take care of your people, have a little bit of fun. Take care. Bye bye.